Mark nodded solemnly. They certainly do, which is why I submitted Form 22B for a temporary exemption last week. You know, since I was offshore until last night. Diane's expression flickered. I don't recall approving any exemption. You didn't. Mark agreed. The vice president did. Doug signed off on it last Tuesday. He pulled out his phone and showed her the email confirmation. It's all properly documented. The mention of her husband's name caused a muscle in Diane's jaw to spasm. Doug's occasional acts of bureaucratic rebellion were legendary in the neighborhood, small protests against his wife's iron-fisted rule that he could reasonably claim were just following proper procedure. Well, Diane recovered quickly, making a show of scanning her clipboard. Your lake-facing exterior trim is showing signs of fading. Section 9.4 requires all exterior paint to maintain consistent appearance and coloration. Mark smiled. Funny you should mention that. I've already scheduled the painters for next week. The work order was submitted through the HOA portal yesterday. He gestured to his meticulously maintained home. I'd never let my property fall below standards, Diane. You know how much I respect the rules. What he didn't add was that he'd learned long ago the best defense against Diane wasn't confrontation. It was preemptive compliance coupled with exhaustive documentation. For every regulation she wielded, he kept a digital folder of approvals, exemptions, and receipts. As Diane searched for another violation, Mark's neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, waved from her garden. Mark, I've got those tomato seedlings ready for you. And thank you again for fixing my sprinkler system. Diane's eyes narrowed at this reminder of Mark's popularity in the neighborhood. While she ruled through fear, Mark had built connections through genuine helpfulness, adjusting garage doors, troubleshooting Wi-Fi networks, and teaching the neighborhood kids to fish from his dock. It was an influence Diane couldn't cite or regulate away, and it clearly rankled her. I'll keep an eye on that trim painting, she said finally, making a notation on her clipboard. The approved color is seaside mist, not coastal fog. They look similar, but have different reflectivity ratings. Wouldn't dream of using the wrong shade, Mark assured her, raising his coffee in a mock toast. Enjoy your walk. As Diane marched away, Ted texted again. Round 347 to Henderson. When will she learn? Mark chuckled and replied, never. That's what makes it fun. Little did he know that Diane wasn't retreating. She was merely regrouping for what would become their most epic battlefield. Mark paced his kitchen, weighing options. The police would take hours and create a scene. A tow truck would do the same. Despite his hatred for Diane, he couldn't bring himself to ruin her daughter's wedding day. The bride hadn't inherited her mother's particular strain of entitlement. He paused at his kitchen window, staring at the offending vehicle, when his eyes drifted to his beloved Boston Whaler. A slow smile spread across his face. If you're going to quote HOA bylaws, he murmured, you should really read them first. Mark's property had a strategic advantage Diane had overlooked, a wide side yard with lake access that bypassed his block driveway completely. He pulled out his phone and made 3 rapid-fire calls. 20 minutes later, his former Navy buddies Mike and Sanjay arrived, bringing donuts, coffee, and gleeful expressions. Seriously? Mike asked, surveying the limo. She actually did this. Even for Diane, this is next level, Sanjay added, already removing the boat cover. Mark outlined his plan. With military precision, the trio hitched his boat trailer to Mike's truck and navigated through the side yard. They positioned the Boston Whaler directly behind the limousine with surgical precision, exactly 1.75 inches of clearance. Not enough to scratch the limo's paint, but not enough to maneuver around either. The manufacturer recommends at least 4 feet for safe backing operations, Mark said innocently as they removed the trailer hitch. For good measure, Mark installed heavy-duty wheel locks on the trailer and positioned his security cameras for optimal viewing. The final touch. A laminated notice on elegant cream cardstock, matching Diane's wedding invitations, attached to the boat. Note IC of TMPORARI recreational vehicle HLAC mint, per Oakwood Estates HOA Bylaw 8.3. Temporary accommodations for significant life events. This weekend fishing tournament accommodation will conclude Sunday evening following trophy presentation. We apologize for any inconvenience. Management. As the wedding music began across the street, the three men settled into Adirondack chairs on Mark's porch with cold beers and a cooler full of sandwiches. "How long do you think until she notices?" Sanjay asked. Mark checked his watch. Ceremony scheduled for 45 minutes. Photographs for 30. Then Limo departure to the reception venue at precisely 1:35 p.m. He sipped his beer. "I'd say we have approximately 74 minutes of peace before the Category 5 hurricane makes landfall." "What's your exit strategy?" Mike asked, ever the tactician. Mark grinned. "That depends entirely on how badly Diane wants her daughter to make it to her reception." At exactly 1:32 p.m., 3 minutes ahead of schedule, the chauffeur emerged from the wedding, adjusting his bow tie and twirling his keys. His path to the limousine took him past Mark's boat, then back again, then around in a confused circle. Ted, who had joined the watching party with nachos, narrated. And here we see the first moment of realization. Note the widening of the eyes, the double take, and now the frantic phone call. The neighborhood watch had grown. Mrs. Patel from across the cul-de-sac arrived with samosas. The Rodriguez family brought lawn chairs, and their teenage daughter live-streamed the unfolding drama for her TikTok followers under hashtag HOA Karen meltdown. The chauffeur sprinted back to Diane's house. 30 seconds later, the sound of an outraged shriek pierced the wedding music. "That," Mark said appreciatively, "is the sound of someone seeing the consequences of their actions for the first time in decades." The wedding party emerged en masse. The bride in white, bridesmaids in lavender, groomsmen in gray, all led by Diane, whose elaborate mother of the bride updo seemed to vibrate with rage. Her face had bypassed red and achieved a shade of purple previously only documented in deep-sea creatures. "Hen dea ass on," she bellowed, marching across the street with remarkable speed for someone in 3-inch heels. Her husband trailed behind, carrying what appeared to be a gift basket and a white flag fashioned from a napkin. "Afternoon, Diane," Mark greeted pleasantly, raising his beer. "Lovely ceremony. The string quartet was a nice touch." "Move. That. Boat." Each word was its own sentence. "I'd love to," Mark replied, "but I'm afraid I can't." Section 8.3 of Community Bylaws allows temporary accommodations for significant life events. "I've got a fishing tournament this weekend, a significant life event for me." The chauffeur stepped forward. "Sir, we're on a schedule. The reception venue is 20 minutes away at the lakeside." Mark finished. "Yes, I know. I consulted your company's schedule when planning my day." Diane's husband thrust forward the gift basket. "Mark, please. We've got chocolate, whiskey, and a gift card for Bass Pro Shops." "Doug's trying to bribe me," Mark informed his audience, who had grown to include most of the eastern side of the neighborhood. "That's against HOA ethics regulations, isn't it, Diane?" "This is sabotage," Diane hissed. "Deliberate, malicious sabotage." "No," Mark corrected calmly. "This is someone parking their vehicle on their own property. The sabotage happened when you instructed this gentleman," he nodded to the waiting chauffeur, "to block my driveway without permission." "What will it take?" Doug asked desperately, as the bride began crying softly. Mark considered. An admission that Diane lied about HOA approval, a formal apology for trespassing, and, he paused dramatically, her immediate resignation as HOA president. The crowd gasped. Even Mike and Sanjay looked shocked. "Never," Diane screeched as her perfectly contoured makeup began to run. "This is extortion." "Actually," called a voice from the back of the crowd, "it's a negotiation." The HOA's attorney, Barbara Chen, emerged with a glass of champagne. "And as legal counsel, I advise you to take the deal, Diane. What Mark did is technically legal. What you did is technically criminal trespass." All eyes turned to Diane, whose internal struggle played out across her face like a Shakespearean tragedy. Her daughter stepped forward, wedding gown shimmering in the afternoon sun. "Mom," she said quietly, "what did you do?" The crowd went silent. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. Brittany Wilcox, Stanford-educated environmental lawyer and notably un-Karen-like daughter, surveyed the scene with growing horror. "You parked our limo in Mr. Henderson's driveway. Without permission. Honey, it was for your wedding photos." "It was illegal," Brittany cut her off. "And embarrassing." She turned to Mark. "Mr. Henderson, I'm mortified. This isn't who I am, and it's not how I wanted my wedding to go." Mark's resolve softened. He'd known Brittany since she was in high school, a quiet, kind kid who'd escaped to college the moment she could. "Your mother and I have our differences," he said gently, "but today is your day. I have no desire to ruin it." "What would it take to resolve this?" Brittany asked, lawyer mode engaged. Mark considered. 3 things. First, a public admission that there was no HOA approval for parking in my driveway. Doug immediately nodded. Absolutely true. No approval. Second, an apology for trespassing. All eyes turned to Diane, who looked like she was actively trying to disintegrate through sheer force of will. "Mom," Brittany pressed, "please." Diane's face contorted as though she were passing a kidney stone. "I apologize for the parking situation." "And third?" Barbara Chen prompted, now recording the proceedings on her phone for the HOA records. Mark smiled. "A binding agreement that my boat will never again be the subject of an HOA complaint, citation, or discussion." Diane looked ready to spontaneously combust, but Doug answered immediately. "Done. In writing. Today." Mark nodded, satisfied. "Sanjay, Mike, let's move this beauty." Within 3 minutes, the boat was relocated, the limo freed, and the wedding party loaded. As the vehicle prepared to depart, Brittany leaned out the window. "Mr. Henderson," she called, "would you like to come to the reception? Open bar, great band, and I'm seating you far from my mother." A cheer went up from the neighborhood crowd. 6 hours later, Mark found himself on the dance floor with Barbara Chen, who'd spent most of the reception detailing her 5-year plan to revolutionize the HOA. "And that's why I'm running for president next term," she concluded. Across the room, Diane sat alone at a table, sullenly stabbing cake. Doug was enjoying his first night of freedom in 20 years, dancing with abandon to INCA. Near midnight, as Mark prepared to leave, Brittany sought him out. "Thank you for coming," she said, "and for being the bigger person." "Your mother and I will never be friends," Mark admitted, "but I meant when I said, today was your day." "About that boat," Brittany said with a smile, "I've always thought it was beautiful. In fact," she handed him a business card, "I'm starting an environmental nonprofit focused on lake conservation. We could use a good boat and captain for water testing. Pay position, weekends only." The following month, as Mark took his Boston whaler out for water sampling, he waved to the new HOA president, Barbara, who was measuring Mrs. Abernathy's decorative flamingos with a smile instead of a citation. Diane had been relegated to committee member emeritus, a position created specifically to have no actual power. That same day, a certified letter arrived at Mark's house. Inside was a formal notarized amendment to the HOA bylaws, containing a new clause. "The vintage Boston whaler belonging to Mark Henderson is hereby classified as a historical neighborhood asset and as such is permanently exempt from all storage regulations." It was signed by every board member, including, with visibly grudging penmanship, Diane Wilcox. Mark Henderson's security cameras caught Diane Wilcox measuring his grass with a ruler at 6:43 am on a Tuesday. Again. 2 3/8 inches, he muttered, watching the footage on his phone while sipping coffee. "Within regulation by 5/8 of an inch. Better luck next time, Karen." Mark had lived in Oakwood Estates for nearly a decade, a quiet refuge where the ex-Navy Marine engineer could decompress between offshore contracts. His prized corner lot backed onto Lake Serene, home to his most treasured possession, a vintage 1976 Boston whaler he'd rescued from a junkyard and restored to gleaming perfection, a boat that made fishing buddies drool and Diane Wilcox's eye twitch uncontrollably. Diane, HOA Karen, in neighborhood group texts, had maintained her iron grip as Homeowners Association president for 3 consecutive terms through a combination of intimidation, selective enforcement, and the fact that nobody else wanted the job. Her clipboard contained meticulously documented infractions going back 7 years. Her camera roll was 90% photos of violations. Her husband had developed a 1,000-yard stare that neighborhood psychologist Jim Porter diagnosed as chronic HOA spouse syndrome. Mark's relationship with Diane had deteriorated the day he moved in, when she presented him with a 47-page welcome packet of regulations, highlighted and tabbed for his convenience. Their first true battle erupted over his boat, despite being legally stored on his property, and specifically permitted in the HOA bylaws that Mark had actually read, unlike most residents. "It's an eyesore," she'd declared at an emergency HOA meeting she'd called solely to discuss his boat. "It's a classic," Mark had responded calmly. "Fully restored, properly maintained, and parked according to Section 5. Paragraph 12 of the very regulations you wrote." The board had ruled in Mark's favor 6-1. The lone dissenting vote belonged to Diane, who'd left the meeting room muttering about amendment procedures and community standards appeals. That had been just the first skirmish in their 8-year Cold War, a war that was about to turn blistering hot with the arrival of a white stretch limousine. Mark finished his coffee and headed out to inspect his lawn. The morning dew still clung to the perfectly maintained Kentucky bluegrass as he walked the perimeter of his property. His landscaping was impeccable, not out of fear of Diane's citations, but from the same meticulous attention to detail that had made him an exceptional engineer. The precise rows of petunias, exactly 18 inches from the property line, as stipulated in Bylaws 7.32, the mathematically spaced sprinkler heads, and the hand-pruned hedges were a source of personal pride. His phone chirped with a message from Ted next door. "Incoming at 3 o'clock. Battle stations." Mark turned to see Diane power walking toward him in a peach tracksuit, clipboard in hand like a military officer's sidearm. Her platinum blonde hair was secured under a Oakwood Estates neighborhood watch visor, and her lips were set in what his Navy buddies would call torpedo deployment formation. "Morning, Diane," Mark called pleasantly. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" She paused at his property line as if prevented by an invisible force field. "Your garbage can is visible from the street. Is it now?" Mark took a thoughtful sip from his travel mug. "That's interesting, given that today isn't garbage day, and my can is stored in the garage." "Yesterday's garbage pickup," she clarified with the triumphant tone of someone springing a trap. "Your can remained at the curb until 7:42 p.m. The bylaws clearly state all receptacles must be removed by 7 o'clock p.m. on collection days. Yet,